Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. Well, hello everyone officially, and welcome to the Community Marriage Initiative Fund's monthly training event. My name is Katie Ray, and I'm with Marriage Initiative, and I have the privilege of working closely with our amazing CMI teams across the U.S. as they connect and serve with intentional purpose in their respective communities. And as always, I want to thank you all for joining us here today. And before we get started, I'd like to just do a quick recap of our July event for those of you who weren't with us last month. And last month, we had the privilege of hosting JP DeGantz. And JP spoke on his book, Endgame, which many of us were familiar with. And JP began his presentation by touching on a multitude of different topics, including the collapse of faith and family in America, as well as the current cultural revolution and the marriage crisis our country is facing. But then he went on to talk about Communio and their process for equipping churches with proven strategies and technologies to really help them address some of these pressing issues that he had mentioned at the beginning of his presentation. And over the past few months, we have been so fortunate to hear from remarkable leaders, both local and national. And this month is really no different. But before I introduce our first speaker, Miss Kate Angelo in Springfield, Missouri, will be opening us up in prayer. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, guys. Lord Jesus, I just pray right now that you will be with us throughout this whole meeting. Thank you for allowing us to gather in this virtual table to bring the word to you. I just ask that you will empower us to continue to run this race that you've set before us, and let us focus on pleasing you and not necessarily statistics and the things that we can accomplish in our own right. Supply us with the time and the ability to manage that time well, and fill us with a love for you, God, just a love that we would focus our whole heart, our whole soul, and our whole mind on the things that you have before us. Lord, I pray that we will continue to delight in your word, that we will seek your face daily, and that we will be filled with peace and faith. And beyond that, let your favor just rest upon us and the work that we do for you, God. We just pray right now, Lord, that you will teach us to model the godliness as we should, as we go out, and leaders, wives and husbands, brothers and sisters, so that the next generation might know you. And I just pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Kate. Beautifully said. So first on our agenda for today, we have Dr. Bill Doherty. And Dr. Doherty is an internationally recognized marriage therapist, a researcher, a writer, and a professor at the University of Minnesota. And he has a passion for really upgrading the quality of support for marriage, both from therapists and from community members. And for therapists, he has developed something called discernment counseling for couples who are considering divorce. And then for lay people, he has developed marital first responders, which we will touch on here in a bit. And marital first responders teaches natural confidants how to support friends and family when their marriage is facing trouble. And along with his daughter, Elizabeth, Dr. Doherty founded the Doherty Relationship Institute, which spreads his work across the country. And his book for couples is entitled Take Back Your Marriage. So welcome, Dr. Doherty, and thank you for joining us here today.
Happy to be with you.
So I wanted to start our discussion with the book, Why Marriage Matters, 30 Conclusions from the Social Sciences, which you were one of the authors of this book. And the book really focuses on divorce, cohabitation, and marriage in the U.S. Can you tell us from your own perspective why marriage matters?
Yeah, it's the big question, isn't it? And I'd like to say marriage matters for children. And for children who grow up in a stable healthy marriage, in marital family, there is just so much evidence that their life prospects are better. And of course, it doesn't mean that if that doesn't happen, which is of course outside of their control, that they're doomed to not have a good life. But on average, the most important family form for children to grow up in is one in which their parents are married and have a reasonably good relationship. So it matters a lot to children for their future prospects. It matters for the married couple themselves, that again, loads of research showing that adults who are married are healthier, they make more money, they just in so many areas of life, psychologically, medically, and so on, they're better off. And then it matters for society, that societies, that countries that have stable, healthy marriages at the basis of their families are much more apt to prosper. So any indicator of societal well-being, from poverty rates to incarceration rates, are going to be shown to be related to the viability of marriages and families based on marriages. So it's really quite clear marriage matters a lot, not just personally, but for society.
Absolutely. You also wrote a book entitled "Take Back Your Marriage," staying on the theme of marriage, of course. And in chapter 11 of the book, you suggest that every marriage should be supported by a community. Can you tell us a little more about your thoughts behind this statement and why community is so important for marriages?
Well, historically, of course, marriages, married couples, families were thoroughly embedded in communities, Most people's housing, before the Industrial Revolution was in rural areas where people went indoors mainly to eat and sleep, but otherwise lived their lives out in community. And people kind of knew each other's lives. People could do supports and support people and intervene if necessary. Starting in the 19th century, we privatized marriage and family life so much as we became urbanized and industrialized and so on. And so we have much more isolated married couples now who don't even know when they're experiencing normal marital problems. We do a better job of supporting parents. We're not perfect at it, but the norm powerful with parenting. So you can talk about you're not sleeping with your infant, your toddlers, your beautiful toddlers all of a sudden say no all the time. Your teenager isn't enthusiastic about opening up to you, and you will have probably people in your life who say that's normal, hang in there, this is what I did. But when it comes to marriage, we have this norm of privacy at the same time as we have super high expectations for marriage, for this to be my my soulmate, my intimate soulmate, and so many expectations, so private, that couples are so often they suffer alone. And so it's really important for others, extended family, friends, churches, and so on, to find ways so that couples are not alone and isolated, often just dealing with the ordinary problems that then people think are extraordinary, or they think it's about them. So community building is crucial for any kind of marriage initiative, not just equipping individual couples with skills and knowledge to make it on their own, but at the same time surrounding them by community.
Absolutely. And I know that our community leaders here know that that's, rings so true in their communities as well. So now that the audience knows a little bit more about your books, I'd like to turn our focus to one of your many projects. The first one being Minnesota Couples on the Brink. Could you tell us some more about this project in terms of kind of its history and backstory, its progress over time, as well as how it has made a difference in the marriage space?
Yeah, well, about probably 15 years ago now, the judge who was the new head judge of the Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis, a family court, Bruce Peterson, he called me and said, "Can we have coffee?" And I said, "Sure." And it turns out he had attended some talks I'd given in the community about marriage and parenting, and he said that in the divorce court, and it's a very kind of modern, progressive divorce court, he said they have a kiosk, they have something for everybody, financial help and custody help and so on, but nothing for people who might want to back up and consider reconciling. And he would meet with every couple that was assigned to him outside of chambers. No robe on. They came in, they sat on a sofa, and there were some of these couples that they were doing the divorce so well. He was wondering why they were breaking up. I mean, he said, divorce, you have hundreds of decisions to make in a divorce. And they were doing so well. And some people would come in, they drive together and they're smiling at each other. And so he was convinced that there's some subset of these folks who enter the court whose marriages could be salvaged and who might want to be interested in it. And he asked me, was there any research on interest in reconciliation among people who had filed for divorce? And there wasn't any. So we did it. We did it in that court. We surveyed a couple thousand people, couples, individuals. And what we found was that there is a meaningful number of couples in which one or both are interested in possibly reconciling if there were services available. If you take one or both, it was up to 40% of the couples where at least one of them was interested in that. And 12% of the couples both expressed interest. They both did. And here they were well into the divorce process. So out of that came a group of collaborative divorce lawyers who I met with for 2 years for them to be able to help people discern whether they wanted to go ahead with the divorce or seek help. So they got better at that, and they were finding these couples where there was interest. And then they asked me, well, what do we do with them? And the problem is that a lot of these couples had tried couples therapy or marriage counseling before and had failed. And then I told the lawyers about an approach I had used for some years, just in my own practice, with couples, and now we're getting into what discernment counseling is. Mixed agenda couple. Somebody's leaning out of the marriage and towards divorce, but not completely sure. The other's leaning in, wants to save it. Almost all divorces involve somebody who begins leaning out and the other leaning in. It's hardly ever a situation where they come together at the dining room table and say, should we get a divorce? Yeah, I was thinking that. Somebody is out ahead of the other person. And then they often spring it on the person and there's a crisis. So I developed a way to work with couples in short-term fashion, no more than 5 sessions, to help them develop clarity and confidence about a direction for their marriage based on a deeper understanding of what's happened to the marriage and each person's contributions to the problem. So clarity and confidence and understanding. So I told the lawyers about this, and they said, that's where we want to send people. What should we call it? And I said, we came up with the term discernment counseling. And so now it's getting out there in the field of couples therapy for a particular kind of couple who come to therapy with different agendas. That's why I call the mixed agenda. One person is trying to clarify whether to leave or not. They're not quite fully out, but they're close. The other person wants to save the marriage and wants to do the therapy. And so discernment counseling is a very specific, structured way to help the leaning in one present themselves in a way that maximizes the chance that the spouse will want to really embark on serious couples therapy. Working with the leaning out person to try to understand what's happened, how they're feeling about this, see if you can restore hope that something could come out of that something good could come from getting help for the marriage. And so So we talk about three paths. Path one is to go on as you've been, neither divorce nor get help. Path two is separation, divorce. And path three is a 6-month effort in couples therapy and often with other resources with divorce off the table to see if you can put your marriage into a place where it could be healthy and satisfying to both people. So it's not therapy. It's not designed to help people improve their marriage. It's designed to help them to decide whether they could improve it and to see if they could be motivated to try. So we've trained about 1,000 therapists in this approach right now. So it's one of my favorite baby in the couples therapy area.
Wow, 1,000 counselors. That's amazing. What a wonderful program. And another project that I wanted to touch on is your Marital First Responders project, which really focuses on trusted confidants in the community. What makes this curriculum so unique, and how can family and friends apply it when their loved ones are in need?
Yeah, so I came across some years ago something called mental health first aid training. It started in Australia, spread around the world. And that became the template for marital first responders. Mental health first aid is equipping ordinary people with basic, the ability to be helpful to somebody having a mental health crisis. Instead of just telling them to get over it or backing what can you do? And I was really intrigued by that, because I'm so interested in how regular people can support each other's marriages, okay, not just professionals. And so I looked at some research, and we did some research that found that most people who are having marital problems go first to a friend, sibling, coworker. They don't go to a pastor, they don't go to a therapist, they don't go to a program initially. They talk to a peer. And sometimes the peers are helpful and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they take sides, they say things like, well, are you in love? Well, I'm not in love anymore. Well, why are you staying? Okay. And sometimes they're supportive. So I decided to develop a training curriculum. It's a one day, 6-hour training for people who are natural confidants. What we say in the advertising is, if you're the sort of person people open up to about what's going on in their marriage and their relationships. Are you that kind of person? Do you ever feel like you're not sure what to say, what to do? Come and learn to be a good responder. And so we teach listening skills. We teach how to selectively share your own experience. We teach really some challenging, like suppose your friend's having an affair. We teach like how do you do a little crisis intervention and get them to help, how to be a first responder. And we've done studies on this now. We've shown that people learn these skills, that they practice these skills. So we've done some research on this. And now we are making it available free for anybody who wants to learn. And we're asking people who do this to only, if they're going to charge any money, to only charge for the coffee or something like that. In other words, we don't want any financial barriers. So that's the first responders.
Oh, wonderful. And I know we've all been in that situation where someone has come to us and you're right, you just don't know exactly what to say, or, you want to make sure you say the right thing. And so, just like first aid and keeping up with that, it's, your marital first aid. So how wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. Doherty. So I know, kind of changing directions just a bit, I know that everyone in this room knows that being, an advocate for families and especially for marriage can be a very lonely place at times. Dr. Doherty, have you ever felt alone in this work or even at odds with the culture throughout your tenure?
Well, I've never felt alone because there are so many people like those on the screen who care. Okay, so I've never felt alone, but I have felt outside of the culture because we live in a hyper individualistic culture where the needs of self are so prominent, and where marriage is sort of turned into a lifestyle designed to make individuals happy, and so this is against that culture. And also the professions that would seem to be like clergy, have so much difficulty actually mounting initiatives and sustaining initiatives in congregations that support marriages. There's kind of lip service to it. It's hard to do. And then in politics, it's very hard to get any political leaders to take seriously all of the research showing that marriage-based families are best for everybody. And so it does feel lonely. It feels like, here's what it feels like: talking about something that almost everybody in their heart agrees with, but it's hard for people to take the steps. It's hard for political leaders of either party to actually talk about the importance of marriage. It's hard for clergy who have congregations in which there are people who are divorced and single. In fact, a lot of clergy feel like their own marriages aren't that good. It's hard for them to take the lead and to really prioritize this. So yes, so I do feel alone in the culture, but not alone in terms of, I know there are other people who care.
And that's one of the, the purposes of this call here is, so that everyone in our respective cities knows that, they're not alone, and that someone in a different location is doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And so, well, good. It's good to hear your perspective on that, Dr. Doherty. So before we wrap up this session here today, I wanted to ask you a question, and a question that is really contrary to what we often hear. And Dr. Doherty, you've mentioned that the divorce rate is actually declining as opposed to increasing, especially with millennials and younger generations. Can this be a source of hope for our guests here today working in the marriage space? And if so, we'd love to hear your perspective on the topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to just sort of quote the old 50% divorce rate as if nothing has happened with divorce. And in fact, divorce rates peaked around 1980 and have come down. And social indicators like that usually don't come down. Another one that's come down is teen pregnancy, by the way. And if you dig under the data some more, it's gone down in part because each generation after the baby boomers have had more stable marriages. Baby boomers, the big divorce group. In fact, the only group whose divorces are going up are the gray divorces, they call them. Well, that's the boomers, okay? But their children, many of them millennials, their trajectories so far, their marriages are more stable, and we ought to celebrate that. And now interpreting is hard. Some of it is that they marry somewhat later. I think that's helpful, but I also think that they have no illusions about divorce. They are the children of divorce. That my generation, almost everybody I knew came from a stable marital family. Not everybody, but most. We didn't grow up with divorced parents. And so when the individualism of the Cultural Revolution really kicked in, it was to say, hey, I deserve to be happy. I want to be happy. I'm going to go on about finding a new partner. And of course, the children have suffered from that. So this generation are less enamored of divorce. And then the other thing I want to note is that divorce rates for college graduates have gone way down, way down. They've gone down to the levels of the 1960s before the big divorce curve kicked in. And my interpretation of that is that we are helping at least people who have more education. They're starting to be able to do marriage better. I began by saying we have high expectations of marriage now for communication, for equality between the genders, for sexual fulfillment, very high expectations. And I think there's a generation coming along, particularly those who with more education, but hopefully it'll spread, who are starting to get this, who are developing better abilities, better skills for managing a contemporary marriage. So We could talk about sources of despair that would be out there, like fewer people getting married. Okay, but in terms of those who are getting married, we have reason to believe we're turning a corner. We maybe have turned a corner in terms of people's ability to have successful marriages.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. And this may be a question that some of our guests may have at the end, but I wanted to just add it in here now before we parted ways. But I'd like to go back to Couples on the Brink just for a bit and ask you how things went when you presented that to the legislature. Could you kind of walk us through?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, part of what we did with that data is we got the Minnesota State Legislature, had a champion, a marriage champion. We got them to raise the marriage license fee by $5, with that money going to support the Minnesota Couples on the Brink project at the university, with the goals of training and preparing therapists, clergy, lawyers, and others to be able to support couples, to help them discern and make good referrals when their marriages were in trouble. So to disseminate this, to do research on it. And so we have stable funding because of the surcharge and marriage license fee. And we had a champion that helps, but the argument was pretty unassailable that these couples getting married in a given year, many of them are going to be at risk for a divorce in the future. I mean, even with divorce rates coming down, there's a lot of those folks who are going to be in the position where somebody's thinking of leaving the marriage. And this is $5 of insurance money put in upfront so that that people, professionals particularly, who they encounter at a time of marital crisis may be better prepared to help them. That was the argument. So what it's given us is a stable source of funding for our outreach and our research.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Doherty. And thank you again for being here with us today. It has been such a pleasure getting to just chat with you. And we are so honored that you joined our CMI event this Friday afternoon. And I know there are probably some of us, quite a few of us, who have questions for Dr. Doherty. If so, please stick around for our Q&A session following the event, and Dr. Doherty will be happy to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure to be invited.
Thank you again. Okay, so moving on to our next speaker, we have someone who has been a friend of Marriage Initiative for many years, and he actually used to live right here in San Antonio, but I'll let him tell you the whole story. Mr. Bob Rauscher is the care pastor at Life Point Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he oversees the life group there. And today, Bob will be speaking on how his past experiences have influenced his team's vision for the Community Marriage Initiative in Charlotte, North Carolina. So Bob, thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Katie. This is great. So hi, everybody. Yeah, I love being a part of this. And yeah, for me, it started back in San Antonio when I was new to San Antonio. I had transitioned from a church in Arizona, moved into a new role where I was a care and life group pastor in San Antonio in a new community. And the cool part was, and I'm going to just be transparent with you, I just saw a free lunch with this thing called SAMI, San Antonio Marriage Initiative, and I like free lunch. But no, there was that part of me too that just really wanted to get connected now in my new community, get to know other churches, get to know other professionals in this new arena that I found myself in, caring for marriages, caring for people, and certainly overseeing life groups. So there was a free lunch, and so I took advantage of it and showed up. And to know Carl Caton is to know a guy who just will always make you feel number one in the room when he's talking with you. And I walked into this strange environment with people I didn't know. And Carl says, "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" It's like, nobody knows me here in Santa. How could you possibly know? But that's Carl. Carl just has that propensity of picking out that strange guy in the room and recognizing him and putting that together. And so got to, that was my early start in San Antonio Marriage Initiative, probably 7.5 years ago, as I was new to San Antonio. So, and then it was just powerful what I got to experience there. So it was the opportunity to kind of meet with other church leaders who had a heartbeat on marriage and was doing some amazing things in the marriage arena. Sometimes creating their own material, sometimes using material, and it helped expose me to a lot of new information and opportunities to develop our marriage ministry at the church that I was at. So there was that, but it was also the professionals, the Christian professionals that were in the room that you got to mingle with and hear from, and both be encouraged by and challenged by at times. So it was really just such a great vibe to be a part of. And so then when I ended up transitioning from that church and found myself moving to Charlotte, I get out here just prior to COVID, but with really a desire to replicate what I had experienced in San Antonio. I just thought there was nothing like it, to see churches breaking down the walls and barriers between each other, to spend time learning and growing together around the subject of marriage, and then to have it working, to be flooding the market in San Antonio, watch the divorce rate begin to go down in the San Antonio region. So as I come here to my new role here, I thought, man, I want to replicate what we have here. And then COVID kind of challenged that a little bit for a while, but yeah, and then lo and behold, as I continue to dream about that, I get the infamous phone call from Carl Caton, who again just says, "Hey, I was thinking about you." And when Carl says I was thinking about you, he ain't thinking just about nothing. He's thinking about how can I leverage my relationship with you to drive what he's doing. And it's been really exciting for me to think that San Antonio is taking their model and now taking it across the country, and the power in that, and taking it to various cities. And then to get that phone call from Carl really just lit the fire in me that said, okay, it's time to go. And so, yeah, it opened the door for me to begin to reach out to some of the churches. The unfortunate thing is, there weren't a lot of churches in the marriage realm, or at least that they're doing it incognito. They're doing it secretly. So had to do a little bit of research, but stumbled on a couple people in particular. One, my partner in crime, Devin, who I don't know if he's on here today, but Devin has a guy who's been here in Charlotte area for probably more than 8 years and really has a lot more influence. But by teaming up with him, we began to reach out. And I think it was our first call, Katie, that we had 14 people on that first call. And it was like, what the heck just happened here? To which, I never like to take credit for that, because I know who's at work behind it. And, just like the Sammy, the Sammy mission statement, purpose statement, it says the greater, we copied it. So I'm going to say the Greater Charlotte Marriage Initiative exists for one purpose. We believe God desires to redeem and restore marriages in Greater Charlotte by his power and for his glory. And that was always the mantra for San Antonio Marriage Initiative. So we just clamped onto that, and that's become our vision. After a couple calls with Sammy, we had a real desire, because we were doing these on Zoom, just like we all are right now. But we really had that desire to begin to meet together. So again, taking a page from San Antonio Marriage Initiative, we've now set up a monthly meeting in which we gather. And last meeting, I think we had 20. And we're consistently seeing new people. We just jumped from having 6 participating churches to over 10. I think we had 12 participating churches. that are partnering with us, along with some professionals in the arena. And as I said, we're not it's great to kind of dream about the impact we could make on marriage, but what's happening is just the camaraderie and the relationships and the partnerships that are starting to happen. And again, following the SAMI model, where we've introduced now not just a time of socializing and being together, but also teaching elements. So this last meeting, I took Ted Lowe from the CMI meeting from a couple of months ago and played that for everybody. And we continue to share that kind of information. So yeah, it's just been exciting, again, to take something that I was so fortunate to find just support and encouragement for myself, new to San Antonio, but now bring it to Charlotte and see it growing and evolving into what we hope to be a real significant ministry to see divorce rate go down here in Charlotte, and bring people together, flood the market with resources for marriage. So
Absolutely. Well, sorry, go ahead. Did you
no,
have
is that good?
Yeah.
I don't want to take
That's
too much
perfect.
time, Katie. So that was just kind of my story there.
Well, that was perfect, Bob. And, we always say everyone needs a Bob on their team. We share our monthly call with Charlotte first thing on Monday mornings, once a month. And it is just the perfect way to start our week and to see Bob's smiling face and along with the rest of the Charlotte team. So thank you again, Bob, for all that you do and for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Katie. Thanks, Carl.
Okay, so next on our agenda, we have a member of Marriage Initiative joining us, Miss Dionna Sanchez, which a lot of you have probably already met before. And Dionna started out as a social media director here at Marriage Initiative and recently moved to Director of Communications. She's been with SAMI and then now Marriage Initiative for 8 years. And today, Dionna will be sharing on the importance of being intentional when communicating with others. And she'll also be touching on branding, messaging, as well as social media. So Dionna, whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, I just feel like communication is just one of the most important and valuable aspects of our ministry. So to give you a little perspective, I feel like God started training me in communication even before I was aware of it. When I was young, my mom and my sister, they used to always send me in to ask things of my dad. And they said, because when we ask, he says no. And when you ask, he says yes. So without even knowing it, early on, I was learning how to wrap words and to communicate with people. In later years, I had to learn how to speak and craft words with some of our family members who were emotionally unhealthy. And so things needed to be eloquently and carefully said. And then in our family, we have very personal stories of heartache and pain that are around the subject of marriage and divorce. And they affect us to this day. And so that, of course, it affects how I message to the community. I've navigated my own newsletter for moms and a blog, a website for years before I moved to San Antonio and began working with Marriage Initiative. And so all those things, they taught me about working online, communicating, and working to impact others. So for me, I don't feel like I have like a big grandiose resume. I actually feel like it's the opposite, but I like it that way. I'm not formally trained. I didn't go to college. I tell others I'm self-taught, but actually I feel like I'm God trained and he orchestrated my steps. I've heard it said that you don't always seek out your passions, but your passions seek you out. And I've always loved ministry. I've always felt passionate about the home and family, and I've always loved people. And so those are my credentials. And I think God often knows better than us where we can best serve him. And that is definitely true in my case. So when he called our family to San Antonio and he called me to work for Marriage Initiative, I engaged with my whole heart. And that is what communication is to me. It's using your whole heart to relate with someone where they're at and engaging in a way where they can receive it. I feel like anyone can learn the skills to communicate. For us, we've learned a lot about what we do when we communicate on the subject of marriage in our community is about educating. We're teaching people or reframing how they view and value the institution of marriage. And in addition, we're trying to empower them as they get informed and help them learn to reach out, because there are so many resources and classes that people don't even know exist and they're not aware of them. So when you use words in your work, how you use them and how well your team or your group is able to be in alignment about your goals and your messaging, that's going to drive your ministry, your reputation, and it's going to affect how your community responds to you. Those words are going to communicate everything about your values, your principles, and the heart of what you do. So at Marriage Initiative, we've learned that more words aren't always better, bigger words aren't always stronger, and actually it's usually the opposite. Most of the general public wants clear, straightforward, and concise language when we talk to them, whether it's in person or whether we communicate with them via a newsletter, a website, or a social media platform. They don't want to have to figure out what we mean. In addition to our languaging, we've discovered that our branding is really important. The colors we choose to use, our photos, they're all part of forming a cohesive message and our brand voice. So for example, our salmon colors, they were originally chosen by our graphics designer because they represented the culture of our city, and they were very intentional. Our Marriage Initiative colors, we decided to go a little bit more business and professional oriented because they speak to that audience. So once you have your mission, your vision, your voice, all that figured out, it's important to figure out, to realize that everyone needs to be on the same page in your organization, so that when anyone outside your organization communicates with anybody on your team, that each one, as they work in their personal role and area, they can still be cohesive to your ministry messaging as a whole. So everybody's going back to the playbook and speaking on the same subject and the same mission, vision, and values. Our relationships are really important to us. So each subscriber, follower, audience member, or a person walking up to our table or attending an event, they're really important to us. We have made valuable partnership connections that have stemmed from the most unlikely of places: Facebook messages, Instagram DMs, or just being available, like our team hanging out before or after an event or our roundtables to speak to people. And so this is something that's important to our team, to provide value, genuineness, consistency, and trust. And we try to do that every time. And we do this in a number of ways. So we do this by vetting our speakers and our events by a quality and a safety standard we have in our organization. We try to maintain a steady presence with our newsletter and our online platforms. We try to provide value. So we want to give our community more than we ask or take from them. We do this by running advertising online, whether that's Facebook or another online platform, to grow. And we want to draw in new people, always bring in a new audience, but we want to steward our finances in an honorable and a low-cost way. And then as a rule, we try to stay out of engaging in political minefields or national issues. Just stay away from them. We also acknowledge and respond to the voices and the messages that come into us, knowing that we may have answered that query or question 100 times, but to them, they're asking it once, and they're trusting us with that question. And so we want to give them the respect and honor they deserve. So each of the pieces of communication, the website, the newsletter, our graphics, social media, and real conversations, they all work together. So even if one thing doesn't garner the attendance or the results that we had hoped it would, we acknowledge and we realize that we're still creating brand awareness, and we're still teaching people how to rethink about marriage. So as you guys know, marriage is a very sensitive and a private subject matter. And so it's different from the ways that other nonprofits or organizations deal with their communities and message and reach out. You have to filter and tailor things to fit your niche. So for us, we really value social media, YouTube, newsletters, because they help us reach people. The value it brings to our work is huge, and it helps us make critical inroads where people feel safe in their own homes. They still feel private, and so they can watch us for a while. They can see if our content's of high quality, if we really respond to the messages, if we really care. And it's a trusting relationship that we develop with our community. And then usually, hopefully, the goal is it will nudge them into taking bigger steps of hope and healing, whether that's an in-person event or reaching out further for hope and help and healing. So every interaction for us, it's about engaging and impacting a very real husband or wife, and/or it's creating a partnership with a very future marriage expert, a pastor, a counselor, or a church. So some ideas that I use to filter what we put out there on social media are, how can something we say or promote help someone? In what ways would they find this valuable? Is it a free online event that they can attend safely in their own home without anyone knowing they're struggling in their marriage? When we comment back to someone, is it thoughtful and answered with restraint, professionalism, and love in such a way that they feel like they were truly heard and listened to? And then personally in my work, I try to value and make the most of every touch point. For each touch point, it's important to the reputation of our ministry and our organization. So I try to reuse things in a smart way and make the most of every event, connection, and experience we have. So I take a quote from a speaker we have, and then I reuse it on a graphic. Or I share content from someone else we trust, like a national marriage leader, and I promote them instead of promoting us. And I, in turn, possibly create a future ministry connection and friendship, and it often turns into future collaborations. So you guys never know what will develop into a partnership, what conversation will turn into inspiration for messaging, or what simple post will save someone's marriage. We had a graphic once, and it said something along the lines of, pray for a couple in your city right now who might be entering the courthouse to file for divorce. And we actually had someone reach out to us on that exact graphic, and he was going into the courthouse that day. And that graphic impacted him. And there's so many more stories out there like that we don't know, and we may never know, but they're out there, and they remind us that our words matter. They've taught us that our branding, our communication, and our languaging are all about emotions. How will people interact with us? What kind of emotional response will they have with us? And how will that move them forward? I heard a quote that once said, your brand or your ministry isn't just what you tell people it is what others are saying it is. And I think that's something really valuable to remember. So figuring all this out, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to tweak things till you feel your words correctly identify what you want them to say. And we're still getting ours just right, and that's okay. But I wanted to leave you guys with something easy to help guide you, and it's the word CARE, C-A-R-E. And this was from Social Media Summit. And CARE stands for, C is capture attention. A is articulate your message. R is relationships. It's all about relationships. And E is an exceptional experience. Go above and beyond. So I realize that there's a lot to think about when it comes to communicating to your community, but we at Merge Initiative, we are absolutely here to walk alongside of you as you start to do that. And I know you guys are all in different positions or different spots along the road in that process. But wherever you are and wherever you choose to start, we encourage you to make it your own. So test things out through trial and error. Learn what your community needs to hear from you. Filter what you learn, tailor it to your organization and your ministry's needs, capacity, and style. If your branding and your languaging doesn't move you, how can you expect it to move anybody else? So that's kind of a big overall picture that I wanted to share, because there's so much that encompasses every part of that. But I wanted to tell you all that I'm here to learn with each of you in this process. And I'm very happy that I've been able to get to meet some of you so far, and I'm excited to meet more of you. And I'm excited to help you guys realize how powerful it can be to shape and change someone's perception. And I just wanted to say as I close that we do have things to help you with that. We have a batch of graphics that we're willing to offer you guys to use. We have a social media call once a month that I'm willing to invite anybody on, where we talk about changes in the platforms, what's going on with communication. But I just want you all to feel free to reach out to us at any time, and we are willing to help you. So yeah.
Thank you, Dionna. And as you can tell, Dionna has just a wealth of knowledge and information in both communications and all the different social media platforms. And we're just so thankful for her continued guidance and leadership on our team and with our CMI teams around the US. So thank you again, Dionna, for sharing with us today. Okay, last on our agenda, we have Mr. Carl Caton. And as we all know, Carl is the president and founder of Marriage Initiative. And today, Carl is just going to briefly touch on communicating a broad community vision.
Thank you, Katie. Well, it's so fun to be with you all today. And our theme today is creating this broad community support. How do you reach out broadly across our community? And I think this is a really important message for us to talk about today. Dionna, thank you so much for what you shared. Dionna is just a great team member with us. She has been steady and consistent and faithful for all these 8 years. And again, like she said, she's here to walk alongside you. And I think this is all really important. I kind of wanted to wrap this up today because think about this question. Who is the voice for marriage and who is the voice for family in your community? You know, as you think about that, you know, you think about, well, let's ask the question, who's the voice for businesses in our community? Well, it's the Chamber of Commerce. Who's the voice for hospitals and physicians and doctors and everyone in the medical space? Well, it's the local medical association. And who's the voice for schools and for teachers and principals and students? It's the school board. And who's the voice for the family law community and for the law community at large? It's the bar association. It seems like every sector of our community has someone or some organization that's the voice for that sector, for that group of people. But in our communities, I don't think there is a voice for marriage. Who speaks up on the behalf of the marriages of our communities? Who speaks up on behalf of families in our community? And I think that's something valuable each and every one of you on this call can do, is that as you come together and as you begin forming teams in your communities, you can, just as Dionna said, you can be the voice for your community, for marriages and families. And I think it's absolutely important that we do that. And I want to share why that's important. It's important because we need to reframe what it is people think about marriage in our cities. You know, marriage in our communities, you know, marriage has gone through decades of a cultural battle over the definition of marriage. There's been great, you know, there's been a great loss of hope around marriage. There's been, some levels of a loss of trust around marriage. And we need to reframe what marriage is, because I'll give you an example. I went to our state capitol, talked to a senior official in our state government. I started talking to him about marriage, and the gentleman was very kind, and he paused and he said, Carl, he said, we don't say the word marriage at the Texas Capitol. He said, the word marriage is radioactive. We don't even say the word. And the reason why is because culturally, marriage is seen as a private matter. And so people all across the community don't feel like they can speak up for marriage because they feel like it's a private matter that should be sectioned off from our daily conversation. And that is the farthest thing from the truth, because marriage is far more than a romantic notion. Marriage is the family leadership team. Marriage is the central bond of every family. And as goes the marriage, so goes the family. As goes the family, so goes the community. We need to reframe what it is that we believe about marriage, what we think about marriage, and we need to make marriage more of the daily conversation in our communities. And someone has to lead that effort, and that someone is you. It's Bob Rauscher in North Carolina. It's each one of you across your communities. You and your team of people need to be the voice for marriage. You know, if someone wants to talk about something that's happening in a marriage, who does the local radio station call? If somebody wants to interview someone on television, maybe it's divorce season. As you know, January through March is divorce season all across the country in every community. Who would the local television station reach out to? Maybe a local counselor, but who speaks on behalf of the entire community? That's the opportunity that we have. There needs to be an organization that gives that is a steady beating drum, a consistent presence. You know, when my pastor looks out in the congregation in our church, he sees me and I'm watching him. And then he's always reminded that marriage is something that needs to be prioritized, not only in our church, in our community. So this is a great opportunity that each of us have. And again, we'd love to learn with you. We want to learn together on how to do this. Dionna shared with you a lot of great principles of communication, but I just want to remind us that there needs to be a voice for marriage in our community, and you and your team can fulfill that role. So thank you, Katie, for letting me share today. And I know we want to go back to Q&A, so I'll hand it back to you. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you all again for joining us here today. And of course, a big thank you to our guest speakers. As always, if there is any way that Marriage Initiative can help support you or your CMI team, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can message me at sammy.katieray@gmail.com, and I'll also place a link to our website in the chat below. And lastly, just to give you a little sneak peek into our September CMI training event, we will be hosting Julie Baumgartner next month, and we're really excited about having her here with us. So make sure to tune in, and the date for that is Friday, September 16th. Okay. And then lastly, as Carl mentioned, we will end with a Q&A session for anyone that has questions for our speakers today. If you aren't able to stick around, this portion will also be included in the recording of this session, so you can certainly catch it on our YouTube page following the event, which I will email out to everyone. So with that, if you aren't able to stay, we will go ahead and say goodbye, and we all hope that you have a blessed weekend. And then for those of us who are planning to stick around, we will go ahead and do the Q&A. So if you do have a question, if you could just go ahead and raise your virtual hand on your screen, I will go around the room until we get to hopefully everyone to be able to answer those questions. So I will hand it over to you guys. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask either Dr. Doherty or Bob or Dionna? Let's see, Mark, you're the first one that popped up on my screen, so I'll let you have the floor.
Yeah, my question's for Bob. Where are you located in North Carolina, Bob?
Bob may not, he may have his computer off. He's in, they're in Charlotte, North Carolina.
In Charlotte, okay.
Mhm.
I was on a call yesterday with someone in an adjoining county looking to
Okay.
get connected, so that way I can connect them.
Okay. And yeah, it looks like Bob may have had to sign off, but Mark, I can connect you and Bob following the call.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Wonderful. Mr. Dennis Stoika, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is for Dr. Doherty. Bill, I've been a longtime fan of yours for at least a couple of decades since I first met you back, I think around 2002. So glad to hear from you again today. Got a couple of questions for you. First is you've had many innovations in your life in this field, which I greatly appreciate and acknowledge. And one of those from the past is your marriage-friendly therapist clearinghouse. I'm curious to see whether that is still ongoing and what you can tell us, if it is, what you can tell the group about it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dennis. I've been a fan of yours for a long time too, so mutual admiration society here. Yeah, I developed this idea of the marriage-friendly therapist probably 15, 18 years ago, because I think that too many therapists are neutral on whether marriages people stay together or not. And sometimes even if they are pro commitment, are not necessarily skilled. And so I coined the term marriage-friendly therapist and then created a directory. And my daughter helped me with that. And then we our colleague in Kathleen Wenger at some point then took over the directory, and Elizabeth and I moved on to other ventures. So that still exists. What I've done more recently is try to, I moved away from directories, just to be blunt. Directories are hard because how successful they are depends on where Google lists you, right? And you're not in control of that. So I kind of moved away from the directory area. And now in the Doherty Relationship Institute, we provide training for therapists to be both skilled and pro-commitment in marriage. And so that's where I put my energy since then. So the principle continues. I'd like to add one other thing that I now have been able to do some research on something that has concerned me and many couples therapists, marriage therapists for years, and that is what happens to people when they go to individual psychotherapy for marital and relationship problems. So we now have a paper coming out in the journal Family Process where we surveyed 100 people who have been in individual therapy for marital, broadly defined, because in the public domain you have to sort of broadly define it, problems. And it's not a pretty picture. There's just a lot of undermining that's going on out there. So the idea of being marriage friendly endures, and I'm really determined to try to improve what's going on in the field, because there's some harm that often occurs. And by the way, I've seen over the years, and I see Russ Berg on the call here as well. You can't be sure that if you send somebody who comes from a faith perspective that they are necessarily going to be marriage friendly. That the cultural idea that your own happiness is everything, how I'm feeling, now has invaded the churches as well. And so you can go to somebody with a faith perspective who is overly impressed with your current unhappiness. Let me put it like that. And some people even say, God wants you to be happy. And so there's no guarantee. You have to know people. You have to get to understand. You have to talk with folks in order to be able to get a sense of whether they're really supportive of marriages.
Right. So, Bill, I mentioned that I had two questions for you. So that was the first. So thank you for that. And my second is that let you know that Carl and I are both on the board of NARMI, and you have spoken at NARMI before and have always been exceptionally well received. And so even though I don't have the authorization to extend the formal invitation, I'm wondering, if we did, would you be open to the idea of being a plenary speaker at next year's NARMI conference that's happening in Charleston, South Carolina, sometime in July, we believe?
Dennis, you've always been so shy as a person that I'm glad you're coming out of your shell now and taking some risks. I just really, it's good for your development. No, I'm a fan of NARMI and have spoken before, and depending on the timing and whether people are interested in what I have to say nowadays, I'm certainly open to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, Carl, did you have a question?
Well, I have a question. I have two questions, but I'm going to follow on with Dennis. Being that we have two board members on the call today, that's not quite a quorum, but maybe we could go ahead and say yes. Dr. Doherty, it is such an honor. It is such an honor to have you today. I was so sad that I couldn't be with you the other day when you and Katie were talking. We're so thrilled to have you here. It was so amazing as Katie and I were kind of thinking about this call today. You have a lifetime of achievement where you've done such a variety of things in your life, and everything that you've done has had kind of a big picture perspective to it. Why marriage matters. You've answered so many of the big picture questions. Couples on the brink. What an amazing! I don't know anything like it in the country. And so I just really thank you for your faithfulness in that way. But I've been so curious about Couples on the Brink. That is such an interesting experience. It's such an interesting adventure that you all went on. But I want to go back to that. You talked just a minute ago, you said there were a number of things that family law attorneys could do, possibly you might even have said judges. I know these people are in different roles, and there's different level things that they can engage in. What did you see some of the family law attorneys doing that were effective?
Yeah, well, we developed a brief an assessment tool that with some brief questions that they can use in their office, and then about 10 minutes of interview questions. And so these are all research based, by the way. So on an intake form, there's some introduction that says, people have different attitudes towards, towards possible divorce. Which of the following is closest to where you are now? Okay, so this is what somebody would fill out before coming in. The first one is, I'm done with this marriage. I can't think of anything that would make me change my mind, even if my partner made major changes. The second is, I have mixed feelings about the divorce. Sometimes I think it's a good idea. Sometimes I'm not so sure. The third is, I would consider reconciling if my spouse made major changes. And the fourth is, I don't want this divorce and I would do anything to try to save my marriage. And so we've got good research on those questions and how people respond, and it does correlate to their interest in reconciliation. And by the way, that's been translated into Farsi, so the same survey has been used in Iran, and consistently we find that there are 30 to 40% of people who do not check the first box. That I'm completely done. Anyway, so the person fills this out, and then that becomes a vehicle for the attorney to say something like this. So, Mr. Jones, I see you answered that question with the second one, that you have mixed feelings. Could you tell me more about your answer? And so whatever they say, a little bit more about their answer. And then the next question is, have you gotten help from any sources, for the problems, and then you find out if they've gotten some counseling before, and then a follow up. Could you tell me about that? Because some people went once, or they went twice, or something like that. And then if there's any indication at that point that you're dealing with somebody who has what we call divorce ambivalence, that's the term, by the way, we found with lawyers. Instead of talking about interest in reconciliation, as you said, Carl, that it just says for some politicians, the M-word marriage is a toxic phrase. For some lawyers, reconciliation, they're afraid of that word because it might imply they don't want, to help the person get a divorce. So the term we developed with the lawyers was divorce ambivalence, because they know they run into divorce ambivalence. They run into it all the time. And so if the person in front of them is showing some divorce ambivalence, then there's a little script to describe discernment counseling as a tool. And the big thing with discernment counseling is, as a tool, it's not couples therapy. It's not designed to improve the marriage, to save the marriage, any of that. It's a timeout to reflect on whether the marriage is savable and whether both people are interested in working to do that. So anyway, so that's the little protocol we've used, I can't say it's widely used, but we have some free training through the Doherty Relationship Institute for lawyers. I have a good colleague here who was part of the original lawyers group who uses that with every client coming in.
Wow.
Makes referrals. And then of course we refer back to her. So that's what we do there. Russ Berg, who was on the screen here, was part of a clergy group that I worked with for a couple of years, where we developed a pastoral version of discernment counseling. And I don't know, I don't want to take over here, Katie, but maybe Russ would like to, because Russ has championed this and followed up with it. Maybe Russ would like to say a word.
Absolutely. Yeah, Russ, we'd love to hear from you.
You can't ignore a lead in like that. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, we the faith-based version, I think, really that came out of Bill's heart and my boss, Dr. George Kenworthy, was how can we help pastors and those in the faith community who are not, they have a heart to help couples, but they're just not equipped to have this intervening conversation. So discernment counseling actually in the medical thing it's like triage, exactly what Bill described it. So you're not training pastors or church staff to be crisis marriage counselors. You're helping them in a clear, calm, Christ-like conversation that's guided by you to answer one question. Before we make an irrevocable decision, are we absolutely sure divorce is our best and our only option? And if you have questions around that, the protocol is designed to help you work not only together with the couple, but individually. And then one of the things that's been powerful, I think, that came out of the whole workshop was Bill and George guiding us to have, after you work with them together and then separate conversations, to bring them back and through speaker listener, help spouses in a calm, non-condemning way to have the freedom to just say, here's where I am. Here are the concerns. Here's the hope that I have about reconciliation, but I'm really scared. They've oftentimes have never had that kind of conversation. They've yelled at each other. They've talked at each other. But when they have to sit and listen and they have an opportunity to speak through their own words, this is what it's been like for me in the marriage. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes there are these little windows that open up where a spouse gives some little indication that they'd be willing to get help, and the other spouse has never heard that before. They just have not had. So anyway, the trainings are available. Family Life is helping us do a version of it online that's going to take a while. We're available to help you either through an on-site training or we've done a number of these. I can give you a link to the training we did for Family Life down in Little Rock. It's a 3-hour edited thing that will help. But reach out. Our ministry exists to help people in the marriage space who are working with crisis couples. And so any way we can serve you, coach you, encourage you. I have a number of people who have said, I took the training, I just don't know what to do. I said, well, with the couple's permission, let's do it by Zoom. And you can watch me do it. You're the trusted relationship. And this is also broadened into, I do some teaching, adjunct teaching at University of Northwestern School of Nursing. We have all of the nursing cohorts now go through a version of this just so that they know the tool is out there, because people starting out in the medical field often see they see the evidence of increased marital distress through anxiety, depression, and those kinds of things. And so we've actually had some really interesting things where nursing students get to watch me do the protocol live with a couple with their permission, So anyway, I am so thankful to the work that Bill brought over to the faith community. It has made a huge difference in my life. It has changed the course of the way I work with couples. But secondly, we've over 500 people now have gone through the faith-based thing. Some of you have actually gone through it, or you've watched it, or you've bumped into it. It's an invaluable tool to have in the toolbox. So if I can ask Bill, if I can ask you one question related to how do we connect with a therapist without offending them? Because you can do a great intervention and the weak link now becomes, who do I hand them off to? Mm-hmm. And I have had couples, we teach people in our training, don't do blind referrals. Do not hand out business cards. If you don't know the therapist and you don't know two things about them, you don't know their competency, are they willing to work with couples, and you don't know their availability. Because If couples have to wait a month after they've just come,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
found some agreement, but now it's a month before they can get it. So if you could speak to that, that would be helpful.
Well, thanks for asking me an impossible question, Russ. Yeah, it is a weak link. It is, and I don't have a ready answer for that. I do think one source would be the discernment counselors train list. It's discernmentcounselors.com, because those folks would know what you did. Those folks see, to belong to that, you have to complete it. You have to assert some. You have a values list for anybody who goes through that training. It's a pro-commitment value stance. And so you have some reason to believe that these folks are pro-marriage. And at least they've gone through about a 25-hour training. They put in some decent money to do that. And so that list would be some folks that you could possibly trust. But it's a problem. It's a problem. I agree. The handoff is a problem.
Yeah, but my follow-up, I guess, would be for people in the faith community. Bill's original thing about marriages in isolation don't do well. They need community. I think some couples, even after they go through discernment counseling, they may need more intensive therapy. They may need professional help. But if the bridge thing could be a marriage small group, it could be some community-based thing in your church that can hang on to them and love them and encourage them and just kind of hang on until they can get, and even while they're walking through therapy, I've seen that make a huge difference, because actually some couples have become, I think, over pathologized. They've become convinced that their problems are intractable and unsolvable, and they get into a small group with other marriages are going, holy cow, I mean, you guys talked about divorce too at the end of this huge blow? I thought we were the only ones. So
Well, we just have a wonderful discussion going here. How nice. Well, I'm going to try and follow the rules and go in order. So Amy, I saw that you were next, and then we'll get to Dennis. I think you're still on mute, Amy. Let's see. Let me see if I can unmute you. Do you see on the bottom? You got it. There we go. Okay.
Yes, I thought I was trying to do the space bar trick, but
Oh, don't try new things.
yeah, no, that didn't work. It didn't work. But anyway, I was going to ask you, Dr. Doherty, about your 2006 Reviving Marriage in America. Could you unpack that a little bit for us?
That was the thing I wrote for the Philanthropy Roundtable. So that's the document you're referring to?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of a deep dive into where I interviewed funders who have a track record of funding in the marriage area, and what their priorities are, what's been successful, what's not been successful, and then offering them some tips about that. So that, and I think that's available free on the Philanthropy Roundtable. So that was what that project was.
Do you want to tell us what some of those tips were?
It was a long time ago. I don't remember them all, but I do recall emphasizing investing in groups and projects that are community-based, that run deep, well, like the ones on the screen and the ones that I heard about from Bob and Dionna, to go to not just try to fund somebody's new fancy idea, but to fund people who are engaged, who are involved, who have deep community connections, and then help develop them over time. That was a key part of it, not just going for the fancy new idea.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Bill, one of the themes of this has been asking about some of your published works. And so consistent with that theme and consistent with your original talk about discernment counseling, I'm wondering if you could share your opinion about how people on the call could use this resource to get a better understanding about discernment counseling. And if, for folks that can't read it, it's a book called Helping Couples on the Brink of Divorce, Discernment Counseling for Troubled Relationships, written by, William J. Doherty. Is that a relationship to you, Bill?
Yeah.
And Stephen Harris. So.
Well, every author loves their book shown up on screens, by the way. So Dennis, your check will be in the mail, promptly. Well, that's a book for therapists. And so frankly, I don't know how useful it would be for people who are not therapists. I think for people in the pastoral world, I would suggest really working with Russ and developing that. The therapist discernment counseling approach takes advantage of the fact that we're dealing with people who have worked with couples in crisis for some time, and so there's a bit more depth in it, which would be natural. And so anyway, so thank you for that. The short answer is I'm not so sure it's that I would say go spend the $50 for the book. Although I do get $250 if you do. So it's not anyway. So thank you for that. I have a brand new book, by the way, while we're pitching my books. And do I have a copy here to wave? Isn't that terrible that I don't? But this might be of interest for folks. That it's called the Ethical Lives of Clients Beyond Self-Interest in Psychotherapy. And so I wrote a book in the 90s called Soul Searching, which is about the moral dimensions of therapy. And so I've updated it and changed it because, and this, I'll tie this into marriage. I've been emphasizing we live in an individualistic culture, and marriage is about relational commitments. It's about covenants, if you will. And that's a kind of a foreign idea right now in our mainstream culture. And so what I've done there is to show how counselors and therapists can help clients with their ethical dilemmas, that life is filled with ethical divorce. A decision about divorce is in part an ethical dilemma. People have made a promise for better or worse than for life, and they're considering going back on the promise. That's an ethical dilemma. It's not just a relationship or psychological dilemma, it's an ethical dilemma. Keeping family secrets or not, having an affair, how to deal with the complex loyalty dynamics of stepfamilies, lying versus truth-telling. All of these are ethical. Well, just think about the COVID crisis and making decisions about one's health or the health of your family versus being connected to your broader family and your community. Risking, how do you do the risks of safety? All of these are ethical dilemmas. And what I'm arguing is that the field of psychotherapy, and I would argue pastoral counseling, which is something I know something about, have been basically blind or ignored this ethical dimension of life. And that if you ignore the ethical dimension, if you're counseling somebody who's considering a divorce and you don't engage the ethical part of this, then in mainstream American culture, you're going to collapse it to individual self-interest. You're going to say, what do you need to do to be happy? And that's where things have gone. And so what I show in this book is how to be an ethical consultant as a counselor in a way that respects the autonomy of people, that respects the diversity, the values diversity we have in our society, but nevertheless engages in some depth around ethical dilemmas. And so if you want to think about marriage and divorce, marriage is an ethical, it's in religious terms, a covenantal relationship. There are obligations we take on. And how do we think about, in an individualistic, values neutral society, how do we think about inviting people to engage with the ethical dimensions of their marriage while respecting their autonomy and not trying to take over their lives. So that's what I deal with in my new book, which is called The Ethical Lives of Clients. The last thing I'll say about that is the American Psychological Association solicited this book and published it. And that is the, the most prestigious professional publishing association. And so I was really glad they wanted it, because nobody can claim it's some sort of, you know, right-wing religious thing. This is I'm really putting it into the mainstream.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. And I think we have time for one more question. Mr. Logan Kelly, if you're gonna go ahead, and you've got the floor.
Your name shows up as Logan Kelly, so it's really.
Well, that's
Oh, my
that's really
apologies.
cool, Dennis. I'm not sure how that happens. Must
Oh.
have something to do with the hairstyle. Um,
My apologies. I can't see. I can't make out exactly who's in the little boxes. So my apologies, Ken.
No worries, Katie. The question that I have is again for Dr. Doherty. Sorry that you're having to speak so much at this point.
I love hearing myself speak, so don't.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so that works. Now you brought up earlier, and it's something about marital first responders. And I found that very interesting, because I've had questions addressed at me. I'm one of those people that people always seem to come up to, but I've also have, I guess, when you are one of those people, other people who are also similar have a lot of the same questions. So it's been brought up to me. And I'm just wondering how we can get more information on that. I found moderncommitment.com, which I gather is yours.
So marital first responders.org. maritalfirstresponders.org. We've taken it into, my daughter and I have created a foundation called the Doherty Foundation, Family Foundation for Relational and Civic Wellbeing. And so we've taken marital first responders and put it in there in order to be able to give it away free to the world. But the website is maritalfirstresponders.org. There is a curriculum, there's training, and there's training for people to learn how to teach it. And so among other things, and then I know this will be the last question we have, to be deliberate and intentional and not fly by the seat of your pants when somebody, you know, comes up with a problem. So for example, we talk about avoiding unforced errors. The unforced error, for example, is immediately saying, I don't know why your spouse would have said that kind of thing about you. I experience you as blah, 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 blah. You're immediately barged in and taken aside unnecessarily. The worst unforced error is to say, well, I never thought you should have married that person to begin with. People say that stuff. They say that stuff. Nobody in the family thought you should have ever married Mary Sue. Well, then after another week, they're lovebirds again, and there's Mary Sue at the next family gathering. So how to avoid unforced errors, how to listen, ask clarifying questions, slow down, and then offer a perspective. Sometimes it can be from your own experience, and how to be affirming people's ability to keep at it with their problems. So it's, I think it's I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's a lovely way to be mindful, a mindful confidant around problems. And a lot of it is normalizing too. So we teach, you know, a number of us have just talked about here about the normal problems that people think are abnormal. And so to help my wife, just as an example, and then I'll finish up. My wife is a natural marital first responders, and she told me at a quilt retreat, a woman was complaining about her husband, and then my wife's comment was, "Sounds like marriage," and the woman went, "I guess you're right." Okay, now that's an example of a brief, quick, normalizing response. And the other woman went, I guess you're right. It sounds like marriage. So back to you, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. And Ken, I like how you've labeled yourself as not Logan Kelly. It's very perfect description. Very clear. Well, wonderful. Well, I think that's, I think those were all our questions. And again, a big thank you to Dr. Doherty and to Bob and to Dionna and to Carl and to all of our guests today. And again, we will be posting this on our YouTube page, and I will send it out to you following the event. And with that, we bid you adieu, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful and blessed weekend. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.